Welcome back to the Productivity Show. This is a podcast where we believe that you can get the important things done without having to sacrifice your health, family, and things that matter to you. My name is Tan. I'm the CEO and founder of AE, where we help people become more productive at work and in life. And today, I'm, of course, joined by my co host, Brooks Duncan. How are you today, Brooks?
I'm really, really good. Having a good day.
Good. I'm glad you're having a good day because my day could be a lot better. I think one app we've mentioned before is Rise Science, which kind of tracks your sleep debt. And mine right now is at 14.4. This is probably the worst score I've ever had. But I'm here thanks to some coffee. So speaking of, coffee is a magic potion for productivity, but so is GTD. I know many people who are listening to today's show are into GTD, or maybe you've heard about it. And getting things done is obviously the system that David Allen curated, and it's a really popular system, and was introduced in the book "Getting Things Done: The Art of Stress-Free Productivity" many years ago. I want to say late '90s, if not early 2000s. And here's the thing, though, about GTD. There are a lot of promoters of GTD who are big fans and love it, and talk about it often and are very opinionated, but also they're opinionated on how you should do it and follow it. And if you don't follow it to the T, then you aren't doing it right. There's a lot of stuff like that out there. And between both Brooks and myself, we've been doing GTD for over 15 years now. And personally, we don't really care about it that much about following it to the T. To us, the most important thing is getting our important stuff done. Hence why I mentioned that in the intro. So we're going to be talking about how you can kind of adapt GTD to your own needs. And if you feel like GTD hasn't been living up to its fullest potential, hopefully with some of the tweaks that we will mention today, it will be. So here are three things you're going to get out of today's episode. First, we're going to help you rethink GTD contexts and how you can use them for your own purpose, and we'll share even a better way of using them. Second thing is how you can make GTD weekly review way shorter so you'll actually stick to it. And then third thing is how to handle GTD when you work in a team or with other systems. And we always like to give a preview of next week's episode as well, which is all about trends and stuff that's happening in our industry. So be sure to check back next week. And before we kick it off, let's talk about our top three favorite resources. So Brooks, what do we have in store for everybody?
All right. Well, the first one, you feel like you kind of have to. We better list the book. So the book, like you said, is Getting Things Done: The Art of Stress-Free Productivity by David Allen. Both Tan and I, we both purchased it, like he said, over 15 years ago. I still have it here on my desk right now, actually. That's number one. Number two is a resource that we made. It's a workflow map. So a while ago, we made this GTD workflow map, and it was actually pretty popular. So we'll put a link straight to that. And number three is nothing specifically to do with GTD, but I've heard really good things about Nebo. So we had some conversations in our Productivity Academy about alternatives to using like GoodNotes with an Apple Pencil if you're in, say, the Windows world or the Android world. So Nebo is a pen-based note-taking app available for Microsoft Surface, available for iPad and Android. And a lot of people really, really recommend it. So if you want to use your pen on a tablet, but don't have an iPad necessarily, Nebo is a great one for that. And we'll have links to all of those things and actually everything else we talk about in the show notes. And you can find those by going to theproductivityshow.com/405. All right. So like we said, we're going to be talking about GTD, getting things done. We have done a number of GTD episodes in the past. I'm not going to go and list them all. This would be a very long episode. Just wanted to highlight a few resources. Number one, our most recent episode we talked about GTD was a GTD primer. It's called 5 GTD Tips to Become a Power User and Get Things Done Consistently. So that was back in TPS405. So you can go to theproductivityshow.com/322. We also compare GTD to other productivity systems. And that was kind of an interesting episode where we talked about a bunch of different productivity systems. That's episode 355. And if you want to learn more about GTD in general, other than the book, we have a resource page on the website as well, where we talk about all these GTD concepts. We'll have a link to that in the show notes as well. So Tan, we're going to be talking about ways to adapt GTD to your needs. So why don't you start us off?
Yeah, so the first thing I want to talk about here is to rethink your context. So a bigger idea might even be to ditch them altogether. Okay, cue the haters right now. I know a lot of people are going to be upset right now. What are you talking about, Tan? what do you mean getting rid of context? Well, to give you some context here, pun intended, I read GTD probably back around 2006. And I remember in the book, they talk about how you can use something like at computer or at phone, right? So if you had a task that can only be done on your computer, you would assign a context, something like at computer. Likewise, if you had to make a phone call or there was something you can only do on your phone, you would create something like at phone, so you can kind of differentiate between your tasks. You can quickly find stuff as needed, and that was the whole purpose behind a context, which it kind of gives you kind of like a almost like a tag or a label, so you know very quickly how you can do something and when and where. So this is again around 2006, and then 2007, about a year later, the iPhone came out, and that literally changed the game for so many different things. But for me personally, it also changed how I got work done. And with the iPhone, we had, Edge at that time, which was, pretty slow, but it was still possible to kind of surf the internet, right? And what also changed is now I was checking my email on my phone. That was one of the major game changes. I was never cool enough and early enough to have the Burberry, or not the Burberry, the Raspberry. Was it?
BlackBerry.
BlackBerry, that's right. Two different brands. And so I was like, okay, yeah, this is like not for me. This is like corporate America, right? Back in the day, I wasn't ready for corporate America quite yet. And so I was checking my email for the first time on the iPhone. And I remember it now, like one of my tasks, if I had check email, it went from being at computer to at phone. And then over time, I could kind of like combine the two even and say, well, if I wanted to check my email, I could do it both on my computer and on my phone. And I had other tasks like that where I could do it on my phone or on my computer. And so if I was kind of like organizing my to-do list and I was thinking about like what context do I want to assign, there was a friction point now, because now I could assign it to computer or phone, but they kind of became synonymous over time. And especially nowadays, most of us can do stuff on the iPad, on the phone, on the tablets, on the laptop, on the computer at work, that the context of computer or phone doesn't really exist anymore. And what I've personally noticed over the years, I got rid of context altogether. And I've tried a lot of different things over the years where context became stuff like energy levels, right? So instead of differentiating where I did things, I would differentiate it by energy level. So if I had a task that maybe was something that required very little energy, I would assign a context called low energy. So I know that anytime I was in a bad mood or I didn't have a lot of energy that particular day, but I still wanted to do stuff or get stuff done, I would just find tasks by that particular context. And I was able to do stuff that way. But I kind of got rid of that as well, where, I had like low, medium, and high energy. But then I couldn't even predefine what medium energy was like, because, what does that actually mean? It's either high or low to me. And so that kind of became a friction point as well. One context I did find helpful and that I kind of use today is with people. So in OmniFocus, for example, I have tasks where I have stuff assigned to Brooks. I have stuff assigned to Marmel and other people in the company. So I find it very helpful if I have like a meeting with someone to kind of pull it up and say, okay, what are all the things I need to talk to Brooks about, right? And then boom, it kind of shows up. And that's something I found very valuable. All the things I've seen people do is allocate time limitations to them. So for example, GTD is known for the 2-minute rule, right? So if something can be done in 2 minutes or less, you just do it right away. So some people even create a 2-minute rule task, which kind of goes against the purpose of the 2 minutes rule, because if it's less than 2 minutes, you should really do it. You don't create a task for it, right? But I still see people do that because they think, oh, this is the GT way of doing things, but really it shouldn't. But then, you can do like 5 minutes and 30 minutes and 60 minutes, but over time it becomes more difficult to estimate stuff. So something 30 minutes, 60 minutes, right? So I kind of tried that and got rid of it altogether as well. So end of the day, I got rid of all my contacts. I don't really use it anymore. I don't know about you, Brooks, but I'm just done with them.
So it's so funny because, and this is actually a great example of the way that productivity systems can adapt to your needs and evolve, because I was very strict about my contexts for quite a while when I used GTD. And it was actually from you back in, I don't know if you remember this, when you gave a talk at, I think, Macworld at a OmniFocus event or something. And you were on stage talking about how you use context for energy levels. And that like did a light bulb for me, like, oh, what an interesting idea. And that was the first time I started that was like the chink in the armor of context for me, like, oh, you could totally go off of the kind of like normal ones. And the reason I bring it up is because that's something that worked for you at that time. But then again, you found over time that, yeah, it's like, I think the thing with context is a lot of us, we set them because you feel like you're supposed to be setting them, and we have the system. And if you read like GTD forums and stuff like that, people have a lot of questions about using context and stuff like that, how to set them up. But I bet, I'm going to say like 90% of people who set contexts never actually use them for anything. You know, you might put something as a call, you might put something as an email, you might put something as a online or something like that. But at the end of the day, you just go and do your tasks and don't actually use those contexts to do things with it. So if you are in that boat, if you do find yourself using a bunch of contexts or setting a bunch of contexts, but never using them, I would recommend what you said and just ditching them altogether. Maybe just having one or two contexts. That's kind of the way I've ended up going. I found that a really hard habit to break, but I've been experimenting with just getting rid of context altogether, just using a single one. And it's been no problem at all. I found that I wasn't using them. So I would recommend, you know, maybe if you're scared that your whole productivity system is going to fall down, maybe give it a try for one particular project or something like that, just to see how it goes. But I bet for those who do still use context, a way to adapt it is just to drop them and see how it goes.
Yeah, and if you are listening and you still struggle with using context, or you find yourself being really inconsistent with them, just drop it all together and see what happens. I'm going to bet that it's probably going to be a lot easier and simpler for you moving forward. So give that a try. Again, tip number one is just get rid of all your context altogether. Before we move on to tip number 2 here, I want to kind of talk about TPS Plus, which is the premium version of the productivity show. If you've been listening to us, you know that we release a new episode every single week. And we also have a premium version of the podcast where episodes come in a week earlier, but also you get them ad-free as well, plus some other bonus material. So you can find more information about this at theproductivityshow.com/plus. So that's PLUS. And if you become a member, you get extra bonus content like an audio course on the T framework, which is a system that we use here and that we're known for, plus a bunch of other cool stuff like a cool t-shirt that says one tweak a week. And I want to give a shout out to everyone who's a TPS Plus subscriber. Thank you so much. And if you want to support the podcast, this is the best way to do that. Again, theproductivityshow.com/plus. All right, Brooks, let's move on to tip number 2 here. And what's that?
All right, tip number 2 is to streamline your weekly review. And you're mentioning TPS Plus and Productivity Academy members. We have the live stream. And at the start of this episode, I was asking the people in the live stream if they use GTD. And Fiona says, yes, but struggling to keep up with weekly reviews. So really excited about today's podcast. And it's the same thing for me. I used to have a big problem sticking with my weekly review. And the reason why, at least that I found, is it was just so long. Like I found it would be hard to fit the time, or I wasn't prioritizing it because I had this mental block, like, oh man, I just don't want to deal with it. So I have found that since streamlining my weekly review and then using some other productivity strategies, it's been way more consistent with it, which has really, really boosted my productivity. So Fiona and those other people who are struggling to stick with a weekly review, I would definitely recommend trying that. And if you think about it, the kind of official way to do a weekly review, and I know it's official because the copy of the GTD book that I have a Post-it note that I probably put there in like 2006 or something like that. And it was the page for weekly reviews. And every week I would get the book off my shelf, I would open it to the Post-it note, and I would go through the chapter. And so basically the way you're supposed to do it is you gather up your notes, you check all your inboxes and drop zones, you get to inbox 0, you enter your head of uncaptured ideas, then you review all your next actions, you review all your projects, you review your previous calendar, you review your future calendar, you review your waiting for lists and follow-ups and stuff like that. That is all, one thing. And then, review your someday maybe. Is there anything that should be a real project? And then there's like what they call be creative and courageous, like any wild and big ideas you can come up with. And it's just like, it's a lot. Like I said, I know this because I have the post-it note for the chapter that I would go through every single week. And, all those are good things to do, but it's a lot. And there's two problems with that. Number one, it can take a long time if you do it all. While I was reading this, for those who aren't on the live stream, Tan was falling asleep, making falling asleep motions. And number two, it can be just mentally taxing. Like it's just a lot, and it becomes easy to really skip once, and then you can skip it twice. And then once you skip it twice, the wheels start to come off your productivity system because you don't trust your trusted system anymore. So the recommendation we have is to streamline it, like really take an axe to that. Just because it's in that chapter of GTD doesn't mean that you have to actually follow it. So the one recommendation I would have is they recommend getting to inbox 0 during the weekly review. I think that is not really realistic for most people to do. I would say, in fact, not even trying. Like, you want to have good email practices, and we've talked a lot about email on the podcast, so we won't get into that. You want to stay on top of your email as much as possible, but when it comes to your weekly review, that is not the time to try and be going through your email to file it all away and stuff like that. So what I would recommend is just for whatever you have there in your inbox in, say, the last week, just skim it for anything that sticks out. You'll see emails that will trigger things that you need to do, and then fine, pick it off from there. But don't sit there trying to get to inbox 0 during the weekly review. That's what I would recommend. Getting most things is better than doing nothing. So that would be one thing. And number two, I would recommend skipping the whole 50,000 feet, be creative and courageous, coming up with your big ideas and stuff like that part. And again, not that that is not important. It is a really good thing to do. But I think, I don't know what you think about this, Tam, but I think that should be done as part of quarterly planning or monthly planning. Really, to me, that doesn't really have a place in weekly review. A weekly review to me should be a lot more tactical and things you can do in the next week. So yeah, I would recommend taking really a chainsaw to your weekly review practice and really trying to zero in on the things that will help you right now. What do you think, Tan? What does your weekly review look like?
So mine is about maybe 20 to 30 minutes or so. So I do it every Sunday. And I've created my own checklist that I have in Evernote that I just go through really quickly. And I would agree with a couple things that you said. One is inbox 0. That's something I don't even do when I go through my weekly review, because I have so many inboxes that, yes, I kind of want to look at stuff, but I don't know, make it a requirement to say, okay, I have to be in inbox 0 at everything, because I might have to check my WhatsApp, my drafts, my Apple Notes, my email inboxes, and I have multiple emails, and that alone can take at least an hour just to get to inbox 0. And by that time, you're already done, right? You don't have the energy for other stuff. So what I think is most important is just being current and up to date. So one of the biggest takeaways that I've had from the weekly review part in GTD is just making sure that every project has a next action. Meaning, if you look at something, you should know right away what's the first step that you should take action on. And if you don't have that, then oftentimes projects get stuck, and then they kind of get postponed and delayed, and we procrastinate and stuff like that. And this is where the weekly review is really helpful, is to say, okay, does everything have a next action? But there's also this waterfall effect where if we zoom out and say, hey, if you have 10 or 15 committed projects, a weekly review can take a long time because you might be overcommitted to too many different things, versus I have maybe 2 or 3 projects that I'm working on at any given time. So guess what? My weekly review by default is a little faster because there's only 2 things or 3 things that I have to make sure all have a next action, right? And so one of the things we always teach here is we want to make sure we always hit the critical few. And if you're having 10, 15 projects, you're probably overcommitted. So as a waterfall effect, what can you do to limit the amount of things you're committed to and working on? And that by itself will make it a lot easier to go through your weekly review, because then you just have to make sure that there's one next action for every single project that you're working on. And that goes by usually relatively quickly. Plus, if you have some good practices in terms of, making sure that everything you write down is always actionable and stuff like that, that makes your weekly review a lot easier as well. So if there's one major takeaway, I would just say create your own checklist, because then you can go through it very quickly. And it's one of those things where the more you do the weekly review, the faster you get at it as well. Like the first time is kind of like, any particular skill you're trying to learn, you're going to be slow. You're going to be, it's kind of like if you're cooking a dish for the first time, you have to read every single step, right, of the recipe and figure out, like, is this too much salt? Is this too much pepper? Like, and over time, you just kind of, anyone who has cooked for a long time will just, if they say a pinch of salt, you just kind of grab it. You don't like really measure it. You just kind of throw it in there and you kind of estimate, right? And that's how we do things with weekly reviews here as well. So that's kind of like how I would approach it. But again, the checklist, I can't hammer that home enough.
All right. Tip number 2 is streamline your weekly review. Tip number 3 is avoid GTD busy work and repetition. And some of this is going to be a little controversial, but when I first started at AE, I was already a GTD follower for many, many years. I had a setup that worked really well for me. I had software that I liked. Like I had a whole productivity system. But when I started with the team, and I think anybody who's joined a new company has probably been through this, the company had its own system, right? We use Jira, we use Scrum, we have our sprint board, and then every day we all create what's called our daily updates, which is our kind of commitment to the rest of the team of what we're going to be accomplishing for the day and all that sort of stuff. And at first, I tried to be a really good GTDer and like capture everything I needed to do for my GTD system in my existing system. So even though all the stuff I needed to do was in Jira and in my daily updates from the AE, I would like capture everything in my OmniFocus, that's the software I use, and wanted to make sure I had my trusted system. I had one system where everything was organized. And I even played around with automating this. Like I tried to make it so that if something was assigned to me in Jira, it would automatically appear in my OmniFocus and all that sort of stuff. Essentially I realized that a lot of this was just busy work and totally unnecessary repetition. Like everything I needed to do was right there in Jira and Confluence, which is our other system we use. So why am I wasting my time like repeating myself in my personal productivity system as well? And this is a question we get a lot, which is, how do I have like one system? And this idea of having one true system that reflects everything is so appealing, right? You want one calendar that has everything, one task manager that has everything, one note system that has everything. It's like super appealing for a lot of reasons. But if you work with yourself, that's fine. But if you work in a company, if you work with others, GTD kind of falls down a little bit from that respect, in my opinion. GTD is great for personal productivity, but it's not the best for team productivity. So what I would recommend is embracing the fact that it's okay to use more than one system. Like you might have your task manager, like Todoist, OmniFocus or whatever. And you may also have a team task manager, which is like Asana and Jira. And it's okay to have things in more than one places if that is not causing you big problems. And I would recommend kind of like practicing and being more comfortable with that. What you can do, and this is what I do sometimes, is capture big rocks in your GTD system and maybe more granular in your team system, or maybe like flip the other way around. You've got your long-term projects in your GTD system and flesh it out in your GTD system. And maybe like the big rocks are in your team system. Like however you want to do it is fine, but having everything reflect everything just means you're spending a lot of time managing your stuff and not enough time doing your stuff, in my opinion. And that's where that productivity drag starts to happen. I'm curious about this, Tang, because you're obviously in the same boat. You've used OmniFocus for years and years and years. You've used GTD for years and years and years, but you also use these team systems. How do you handle working with multiple systems and multiple people?
Yeah, I was in a similar situation where even before we used Jira, we were using Asana. And I remember I was like copying stuff over between the two systems, like from OmniFocus to Asana. And then if something got updated in Asana, I would update it in my OmniFocus. And that led to a lot of rework and extra work that was kind of unnecessary, I kind of realized. So I changed my system now where, okay, I might use GTD or OmniFocus more on a personal level, but not reflect that in something like in the team setting that we have. So I wouldn't copy stuff over now from Jira into OmniFocus or the other way around. So everything is kind of like segmented in that sense. So if you look at my OmniFocus, for example, which is all personal stuff, there's some AE stuff in there, but it's more stuff that only I can only work on, right? So for example, I might do strategic planning by myself, which is something I wouldn't really put into Jira because Jira is more for everybody versus stuff that only I can do. So other things would be like, updating notes on one-on-one meetings or something. Like I wouldn't put that in Jira. I would kind of do that for myself. So there's all that stuff that's there. And I find that if you are in a team setting, you kind of have to make that compromise to say, hey, you know what? I might have to separate my systems and just use GTD for my personal use and how I do things on my own. And then whatever I'm using in my company or in the team setting, use that system, whatever is created there. Otherwise, you'll end up with a lot of rework, and it's just not worth it, to be honest. Even if OmniFocus ever gets a web version, I think it's still going to be not the way to go.
Yeah, I mean, OmniFocus does have its web version, which does work. It's pretty good. It's not quite the same, but it's pretty good. But still, I find if you're having to check the same thing off in multiple places, to me, that is a sign generally that you're probably have some busy work and repetition going on. If you want to put like maybe your top 3 rocks in your personal system, and that's what you want to do, I think that's totally okay. But like mapping out and having one for one in everything, I think is just, do what works for you, obviously. But I would say that is, people think of having a trusted system as you need to have one system, like one literal piece of software or notebook or something like that. I don't think that is the case necessarily. For me, I adapt it to be my system is all these things working together, which happens to be for me, Jira in one place and OmniFocus in the other place. And they kind of like complement each other without having to mirror each other. And at least that's works pretty well for me.
Awesome. So that kind of wraps up today's episode. I hope you enjoyed it. And as always, we like to end things with an action step. So our action step for today is figure out how you can streamline your weekly review and prioritize doing it this week, even if you've fallen out of the habit. So if you haven't done it in a while, hopefully this will encourage you to start picking it back up again. And next week, we're going to be talking about what is happening in our industry and in space, and also some interesting trends to be aware of. And next week is an episode that you definitely don't want to miss because we have some controversial takes that I think you're going to enjoy. Also, all the things that we mentioned in today's episode can be found in the show notes, so you can find them at theproductivityshow.com/405. Thanks again for joining us, and we'll see you next Productive Monday.